I'm standing at my brother Dylan's wedding reception right now, holding a manila folder that contains 8 years of bank statements, forged documents, and financial records that are about to destroy everything my parents believe about their perfect family. My name is Kendall, and tonight I'm going to expose how my mother Carol and father Frank refused to pay a single penny toward my college education while secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to support my spoiled brother's lazy lifestyle. The evidence in my hands proves they lied, manipulated, and even committed fraud to keep Dylan living like royalty while I struggled through community college eating ramen noodles. In about 5 minutes, I'm standing up during the speeches to reveal the truth that will shatter our family's carefully constructed lies forever. 8 years ago, when I was 22, everything started falling apart on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I remember sitting at our kitchen table that spring evening, holding my acceptance letter to State University's engineering program. The partial scholarship covered about 60% of the costs, but I still needed $12,000 for the remaining tuition room and board. I was so excited when I walked into the kitchen, where my parents were finishing dinner. Mom was 48, then working as an insurance office manager, always complaining about how stressed she felt about money. Dad was 51, holding down a middle management position at the local manufacturing company, and he had this reputation for being incredibly careful with every dollar we spent. Mom, Dad. I got in, I announced, waving the acceptance letter. State University wants me for their engineering program. I got the partial scholarship we talked about. My 19-year-old brother Dylan was sprawled on the living room couch, visible through the kitchen doorway, completely absorbed in some video game. He didn't even look up when I made my announcement, just kept mashing buttons on his controller. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, but her voice sounded flat. She was shuffling through a stack of bills on the counter, her forehead creased with worry lines. "So I just need $12,000 to cover what the scholarship doesn't pay." I continued setting the letter down next to her coffee cup. "I know it sounds like a lot, but this is my future we're talking about. Engineering graduates start at $50,000 a year minimum." Dad looked up from his newspaper, and I could see his jaw tightening. $12,000, Kendall. Where exactly do you think we're supposed to get that kind of money? The question hit me like cold water. What do you mean we've been talking about college since I was in middle school? You always said education was the most important investment a family could make. Mom turned around, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Sweetheart, we've had some unexpected expenses recently. Major car repairs, the roof needs fixing, and your father's company is talking about layoffs. We simply cannot afford to help you right now. But this is $12,000 total," I said, feeling desperate. "That's only $3,000 a semester. Surely we can figure something out. Maybe take out a small loan." "Absolutely not," Dad said firmly. "We're not going into debt for anyone's college education. If you want to go to university, you'll need to find another way to pay for it." Dylan finally paused his game and glanced over at us. There was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read, almost like he was enjoying watching this conversation unfold. "And what if I took a gap year?" I suggested. "I could work full-time, save up the money myself, and start college next fall instead." Mom shook her head. "Kendall, you need to be realistic about your situation. Maybe community college would be a better option for you. It's much more affordable and you can still get a good education." I stared at her in disbelief. "Community college doesn't have the engineering program I need. This scholarship is specifically for State University. If I don't accept it now, they'll give it to someone else." "Then maybe that's what's meant to happen," Dad said, folding his newspaper with finality. "Sometimes we have to accept that our dreams are bigger than our circumstances." The conversation continued for another hour with my parents presenting elaborate explanations about their budget constraints. They showed me utility bills, mortgage statements, and car repair estimates. Everything seemed to add up to the conclusion that they simply couldn't afford to help me. But even as they talked, something felt wrong about the whole situation. During the argument, I happened to glance toward Dylan's room, and I noticed something that hadn't been there the week before. Through his partially open door, I could see a brand new gaming setup that must have cost at least $1,500. The monitor was massive, the computer tower looked top of the line, and there were expensive accessories scattered across his desk. "Willen?" I called out, interrupting my parents' financial lecture. "Where did that new computer setup come from?" He looked uncomfortable for the first time all evening. "I saved up from my job at the grocery store." I knew Dylan barely worked 10 hours a week at minimum wage. Even if he saved every penny he earned, which he definitely didn't, there was no way he could afford what I was seeing in his room. "How much money are you making at the grocery store?" I asked. "Enough," he said defensively. I turned back to my parents. "If we can afford to buy Dylan a $1,500 computer setup, surely we can help with my college tuition." "Dylan saved up for that equipment himself," Mom said quickly. "It's completely different from asking us to pay for your college," but the explanation didn't make sense. And that night marked the beginning of my realization that something much deeper was going on in our family's finances than anyone was willing to admit. I ended up declining the state university scholarship and enrolling in community college, instead working multiple jobs to pay for my classes. But that computer setup in Dylan's room haunted me because it was the first concrete evidence that our family's money problems might not be as severe as my parents claimed. 2 years later, when I was 24, I was grinding through community college while working night shifts at a warehouse to pay for my classes. I shared a tiny apartment with my best friend Marcus, who worked as a teller at the local bank. Our place was barely 400 square feet, and I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches because every dollar I earned went toward tuition and rent. Meanwhile, Dylan had somehow transformed from a lazy high school graduate into a college-bound student with expensive tastes. The announcement came during a family dinner that spring, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that made my stomach turn. "I've decided to attend Millbrook College in the fall," Dylan announced, cutting into the steak that Mom had prepared for him. Millbrook was a private liberal arts school about 2 hours away, known for its beautiful campus and astronomical tuition costs. I nearly choked on my spaghetti. "Millbrook, Dylan, that place costs $45,000 a year." So he shrugged, not bothering to look up from his plate. I turned to my parents, who were both smiling, like Dylan had just announced he'd won the lottery. "How is this possible? 2 years ago, you couldn't afford to help me with $12,000 for state university. When our circumstances have changed," Dad said smoothly. "We've tightened our belts significantly and taken out some education loans. We want Dylan to have the college experience he deserves." "Education loans," I repeated. "You said you'd never go into debt for anyone's college education. Those were your exact words." Mom reached over and patted my hand. "Sweetie, Dylan's situation is different. He's more focused now, and Millbrook has programs that are perfect for his interests." "What interests?" I wanted to ask. Dylan had never shown passion for anything except video games and hanging out with friends. But I bit my tongue watching as my parents discussed his upcoming move to college like it was the most natural thing in the world. Over the next few weeks, Dylan's college preparation became a family project. He got a brand new car, a silver Honda Civic, that cost $23,000. His dorm room was outfitted with a mini fridge, microwave, expensive bedding, and a laptop that cost more than I made in 3 months. Mom took him shopping for designer clothes, and Dad handed him a credit card for emergencies and textbooks. I kept asking myself how our family's financial situation had improved so dramatically in just 2 years. Dad still had the same job at the manufacturing company. Mom was still working at the insurance office. There had been no inheritance, no lottery winnings, no business success that I knew about. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus and I were sitting in our apartment one evening, sharing a pizza we'd split the cost of, when he casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Your parents sure have been making some large deposits lately," he said, scrolling through his phone. "I've processed at least 3 of them in the past month." I looked up from my textbook. "What do you mean, large deposits?" "High cash deposits," Marcus explained. "Each one was several $1,000s. I remember because your mom seemed nervous every time she came in, like she was worried about something." "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but since it's your family..." Each deposit was around $5,000. Always in cash. Always your mom making the deposit. And she always asked me to process it quickly, without any conversation. My mind started racing. Where were my parents getting $5,000 in cash multiple times per month, and why were they depositing it instead of just putting it directly into their checking account? "Marcus," I said slowly, "would it be possible for you to look up more information about my parents' account activity? Just general stuff, nothing detailed." He looked uncomfortable. "Kendall, I could lose my job if anyone found out I was sharing customer information. I'm not asking you to show me account balances or anything specific," I said. "I just need to know if there's been unusual activity. Something doesn't add up about our family's finances, and I need to understand what's going on." Marcus thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Let me see what I can find out without breaking any major rules." What he discovered over the next few days shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The large cash deposits had been happening regularly for years, not just recently. But more shocking was the pattern of money transfers coming out of my parents' accounts. Every month, without fail, there was a $2,000 transfer to an account in Dylan's name. The transfers had been happening since Dylan's junior year of high school, which meant my parents had been giving him a monthly allowance of $2,000 for over 3 years. But that wasn't all. There were additional payments for car insurance, gas, entertainment, clothing, and something labeled miscellaneous expenses that averaged another $800 monthly. When I added everything up, my parents had been giving Dylan nearly $34,000 per year in direct support, plus paying for all his living expenses at home. The total amount over 3 years exceeded $60,000. That was 5 times more than the $12,000 they'd claimed they couldn't afford for my college tuition. And the money was coming from a savings account that my parents had specifically told me didn't exist when I'd asked about college funding. They'd looked me straight in the eyes and said they had no savings to draw from, while simultaneously maintaining an account with enough money to fund Dylan's lifestyle for years. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My parents hadn't been unable to help me with college. They'd been unwilling to help me because they were too busy funding Dylan's comfortable life. Every night I'd spent working until 2 in the morning at the warehouse, every meal I'd skipped to save money, every social event I'd missed, because I couldn't afford it, had been unnecessary. The money was there. It had always been there. They'd just decided I wasn't worth spending it on. 1 year later, when I was 25, I finally managed to transfer to a 4-year university using a combination of student loans and the savings I'd scraped together from my warehouse job. I was carrying over $30,000 in debt, working weekends at a tutoring center and studying engineering full-time. Every aspect of my life was a careful balance between financial survival and academic progress. Dylan, meanwhile, was living like a celebrity at Millbrook College. His social media was filled with pictures of spring break trips to Cancun, expensive restaurants, and weekend getaways with friends. Whenever my parents visited him, which seemed to happen at least monthly, they returned with stories about the money they'd given him for new clothes, electronics, or some emergency expense he'd suddenly developed. The invitation to a family financial planning meeting came completely out of nowhere. Mom called me on a Tuesday evening while I was studying for a thermodynamics exam. Kendall, honey, your father and I want to schedule a meeting with our financial advisor to discuss everyone's future, she said in the cheerful voice she used when she was trying to sound responsible and organized. We think it's important to get our affairs in order and talk about long-term planning. Everyone's future, I asked, not sure what she meant. Well, yours and Dylan's, of course. We want to make sure we're making smart decisions about investments, retirement planning, and how to help both of you succeed financially. The irony of my parents wanting to help me succeed financially after years of refusing to contribute a penny toward my education was almost too much to handle. But I agreed to attend the meeting mostly because I was curious about what they had in mind. Janet Wilson was our family's financial advisor, a woman in her early 50s who worked for a large investment firm downtown. She had an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture that made me feel underdressed in my work clothes. "It's so nice to finally meet both boys," Janet said as we settled around her conference table. "Your parents have told me so much about your different paths through life." Dad nodded approvingly. "Kendall here is our independent one. He's been working his way through college, learning the value of hard work and self-reliance. And Dylan is our creative spirit," Mom added. "He needs more support and guidance as he figures out his place in the world." I bit my tongue, wondering how giving Dylan thousands of dollars per month qualified as guidance rather than enabling, but I wanted to hear what Janet had to say. "Your parents have done an excellent job building their financial portfolio." Janet continued, opening a thick folder filled with documents. "The investment account is now worth just over $400,000, which puts them in a very strong position for retirement." I stared at her in shock. $400,000. My parents had nearly $500,000 in investments. "Of course," Janet continued. "This money is specifically earmarked for retirement and can't be touched without significant penalties and tax implications. Actually," I interrupted, "I'd like to understand more about how investment accounts work. If you have $400,000 invested, isn't it possible to access portions of that money for important expenses like education?" Janet looked surprised by my question. "Well, yes, certainly. Investment portfolios are designed to be flexible. You can liquidate portions when needed, though you'd want to be strategic about timing and tax implications." I glanced at my parents, who both looked uncomfortable. "So this money could have been accessed for college expenses?" "Theoretically, yes," Janet said, not understanding the tension in the room. "In fact, your parents have made several strategic withdrawals over the past few years. They've been very smart about liquidating portions when the market was high." The room went completely silent. My parents were staring at Janet like she'd just revealed state secrets. "Several withdrawals?" I asked quietly. Janet flipped through her papers. "Yes, let me see. There have been 6 withdrawals in the past 3 years, totaling about $120,000. All very well timed from a market perspective." My father cleared his throat loudly. "Janet, I think we should focus on future planning rather than reviewing past decisions. But I wasn't going to let this go." "Where did the $120,000 go?" "That's private family business," Mom said firmly. Janet looked between my parents and me, clearly realizing she'd stepped into a family conflict she didn't understand. "Perhaps we should schedule individual meetings to discuss each person's specific financial goals." I left that meeting with my head spinning. My parents had access to nearly $500,000 in investments, had withdrawn $120,000 over 3 years, and had told me they couldn't afford to help with $12,000 for college. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept doing math in my head, trying to understand where that money had gone. Dylan's college tuition was $45,000 per year, so 3 years would be $135,000. Add in his living expenses, car, and monthly allowances, and the numbers started making perfect sense. I spent the next week researching public records and investment account rules. What I learned made me physically sick. My parents hadn't just been able to access money for my college education. They'd been systematically liquidating their investments to fund Dylan's lifestyle, while telling me they were financially unable to help. But the real revelation came when I discovered the property records for our family home. My parents had refinanced the house twice in the past 5 years, pulling out over $150,000 in equity through cash-out refinancing. The timeline was devastating. The first refinance happened 6 months before I'd applied for college. The second refinance occurred right around the time Dylan started at Millbrook. They'd literally been pulling money out of the house to fund his education while telling me they couldn't afford to help with mine. Every financial claim they'd made during my college application process had been a lie. They'd had access to hundreds of thousands of dollars through investments, home equity, and savings accounts. They'd chosen to spend that money on Dylan while leaving me to struggle through community college on my own. The confrontation with my parents was brutal. When I presented them with the evidence I'd gathered, they accused me of being ungrateful and having unrealistic expectations. They said I'd always been the responsible one who could take care of himself while Dylan needed more support and guidance. You're stronger than your brother," Mom said, as if that justified years of financial deception. "We knew you could succeed on your own." "Oh, but I shouldn't have had to," I replied. "You had the money. You chose not to help me because you thought I didn't deserve it as much as Dylan did." The conversation ended with them walking out of the restaurant, where we'd met, leaving me sitting alone with the check and the crushing realization that my family's love was conditional and unevenly distributed. By the time I reached 27, I had finally graduated with my engineering degree and landed a decent job at a consulting firm. I was still drowning in student loan debt, making monthly payments that consumed nearly 40% of my take-home pay, but at least I could see a path toward financial stability. More importantly, I'd met Emma, a psychology graduate student, who was brilliant at reading people and understanding family dynamics. Dylan, meanwhile, had dropped out of Millbrook during his junior year. He'd lasted exactly 2.5 years at a school that cost $45,000 annually before deciding that traditional education wasn't his path. My parents had somehow spun this academic failure into a story about Dylan being too creative and entrepreneurial for conventional college programs. Shaktitu. He's starting a business venture with his friend, Rick. Mom explained during one of our increasingly tense family dinners. It's some kind of online marketing company. Very cutting-edge stuff. I watched Dylan describe his latest scheme, which seemed to involve selling overpriced supplements through social media marketing. He spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced real consequences for failure using business buzzwords he'd probably learned from YouTube videos. "How much startup capital does this business require?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "We're providing some initial investment," Dad said carefully. "It's an investment in Dylan's entrepreneurial spirit." Emma squeezed my hand under the table. She'd been observing my family dynamics for months, taking notes like she was studying them for her thesis on dysfunctional family systems. "Yeah, what's interesting," Emma said to me later that night, "is how your parents have created completely different narratives for you and Dylan. You're the responsible, independent one who doesn't need help. Dylan is the creative, sensitive one who needs constant nurturing and financial support." It's not just the money, I realized as we talked. It's the way they've positioned our entire family story. Everyone thinks I chose to go the community college route because I wanted to be independent. Emma nodded. They've rewritten history to make their favoritism seem like appropriate parenting, tailored to each child's personality. The more I investigated our family's financial patterns, the more complex the manipulation became. I discovered that my parents had been telling extended family members that they'd offered to pay for my college, but I'd declined their help because I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own. Uncle Steve mentioned this during a barbecue that summer. "Your mom told me you turned down their college funding because you wanted to earn your degree yourself," he said with obvious admiration. "That's real character, nephew." I stared at him in disbelief. "They told you they offered to pay for my college." "Sure did. Said you were determined to be financially independent and wouldn't let them help." The lie was so elaborate and well-established that even our extended family believed it. My parents had spent years crafting a narrative that painted their favoritism as appropriate responses to their children's different personalities and needs. But Emma's psychology background helped her spot something even more disturbing. While helping me organize financial documents for my student loan consolidation, she discovered something that made her actually gasp. "Kendall," she said, holding up a life insurance policy document. "Did you know your parents took out a $200,000 life insurance policy on you when you turned 18? I looked at the document she was holding. It was indeed a life insurance policy, taken out the same month I'd graduated from high school. The beneficiaries were listed as Carol and Frank, my parents. Makrikakins. This was taken out the exact same week they refused to help with your college tuition," Emma said, checking the dates. "They literally invested in your death while refusing to invest in your education. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. While telling me they couldn't afford $12,000 for college, they'd somehow found the money for life insurance premiums that would pay them $200,000 if I died. And look at this," Emma continued, pointing to the payment schedule. "The monthly premiums are being automatically deducted from the same account they used to send Dylan his allowance." I felt sick. My parents were using money they claimed they needed for Dylan's support to maintain a life insurance policy that would benefit them financially if something happened to me. They'd literally made me worth more to them dead than alive. "Tutikaya, there's something else," Emma said, pulling up more documents on her laptop. "I've been tracking the timeline of their financial decisions, and there's a pattern. Every major expense for Dylan corresponds with a period where they increased financial pressure on you." She was right. When Dylan's car insurance went up, my parents started charging me rent to live at home during community college. When Dylan needed money for spring break trips, they asked me to contribute more toward household groceries. When Dylan's college tuition increased, they suggested I should take on more student loans, rather than asking them for any assistance. They've been systematically positioning you as the family's financial responsibility, while Dylan has been positioned as the family's investment," Emma explained. "In their minds, you're supposed to contribute to the family resources while Dylan is supposed to benefit from them. Pastor Williams from our family church confirmed this pattern without realizing it. During a conversation after Sunday service, he mentioned how proud my parents were of raising two sons with such different but admirable qualities. Your mother always talks about how you're the strong, independent one who helps support the family," he said, "and how Dylan is the sensitive, artistic one who needs encouragement to find his way. Even our pastor had been fed a version of our family story that justified the unequal treatment. My parents had spent years telling everyone that their financial decisions reflected appropriate responses to their children's different needs and personalities, when in reality, they were just playing favorites and lying about it. The web of manipulation was so extensive and well-established that confronting it felt like trying to disprove a conspiracy theory. My parents hadn't just stolen money from me. They'd stolen my reputation, my family relationships, and my ability to get support from people who might have helped if they'd known the truth. But Emma was right about one thing. The pattern was clear, the evidence was overwhelming, and it was time to stop letting them control the narrative about our family. 6 months ago, Dylan surprised everyone by announcing his engagement to Jessica Martinez, a genuinely sweet woman from a hard-working middle-class family. Jessica worked as a kindergarten teacher and had just finished her master's degree in education. She was exactly the kind of person I'd always hoped Dylan would meet, someone who might help him develop some sense of responsibility and appreciation for hard work. The announcement came during a family dinner where Jessica had joined us for the first time. She was nervous but excited, clearly hoping to make a good impression on Dylan's family. I liked her immediately, which made what I was observing even more heartbreaking. "We've been talking about getting married next spring," Dylan said, reaching for Jessica's hand across the dinner table. "Jessica's been amazing, and I know she's the one." Jessica blushed, smiling shyly. "Dylan has been so supportive of my career goals. He really believes in me." I caught Emma's eye across the table. We both knew that Dylan had never supported anyone but himself, but Jessica seemed genuinely happy, and we didn't want to spoil her moment. What happened next, though, made my stomach drop. "We should start planning the wedding immediately," Mom announced, clapping her hands together like she was starting a project. "This is going to be such an exciting time for our family." "Actually," Jessica said carefully, "my parents want to contribute to the wedding costs. They've been saving money, and they really want to help make our day special." Jessica's parents, David and Marie Martinez, were both shift supervisors at a local factory. They were hardworking people who'd probably been setting aside money for years to help their daughter have a nice wedding. I could tell from Jessica's tone that their contribution would be modest but meaningful to them. "That's wonderful," Dad said in the voice he used when he wanted to sound gracious. "But please don't worry about the expenses. We want to give Dylan the perfect wedding he deserves." Jessica looked confused by the emphasis on what Dylan deserved, but she smiled and thanked my parents for their generosity. Over the next few months, I watched my parents plan a wedding that was completely beyond anything Jessica's family could have imagined. The venue alone cost $15,000. The catering was another $20,000. Mom hired a wedding planner who specialized in luxury events, and Dad started talking about flying in flowers from California and hiring a band that typically played at corporate galas. I attended several planning meetings, partly to support Jessica and partly because I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Every decision was made with the assumption that money was no object. When Jessica mentioned that her parents felt uncomfortable about the escalating costs, Mom waved away her concerns. "Don't you worry about that, sweetheart," Mom said. "This is Dylan's wedding, and we want it to be perfect." Again, the emphasis was on Dylan, not on both of them as a couple. Jessica noticed it too, and I could see her becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the extravagance and the way her own family's contributions were being minimized. The total wedding budget reached $75,000, then kept climbing. I sat in those planning meetings watching my parents spend more on one day than they'd claimed they couldn't afford for my entire college education, and I felt something inside me break. But the real revelation came during a conversation with my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who'd been invited to help with wedding preparations. Linda had always been the family member who spoke her mind sometimes, without thinking about the consequences. "Your parents are certainly going all out for this wedding," she said, as we were addressing invitations together. "Of course they can afford it, now that they have access to all that inheritance money." I looked up from the invitation I was writing. "What inheritance money?" Linda looked surprised by my question. "The money from your grandparents, of course. Didn't Carol tell you they inherited over $300,000 when your grandmother passed away?" My hand stopped moving completely. "When did my grandmother pass away? About 8 years ago?" Linda said, then paused as she realized something was wrong. "Kendall, didn't you know about this 8 years ago?" right around the time I'd applied for college. My parents had inherited $300,000 the same year they'd told me they couldn't afford to help with my $12,000 tuition. Linda, I said carefully, do you know what happened to that inheritance money? Shatiatila. Well, Carol said they invested most of it for retirement, but they've been using portions of it to help Dylan with college and living expenses. She said it was important to give him a good foundation for his future. The room started spinning. My parents had inherited enough money to pay for both Dylan's and my college educations, plus have plenty left over for retirement. Instead, they'd hidden the inheritance from me, used it to fund Dylan's lifestyle, and let me struggle through school on my own. Did they use any of that money to help Kendall with college? Linda asked, apparently realizing from my expression that something was seriously wrong. No, I said quietly. They told me they couldn't afford to help me with college. Linda stared at me in shock. But that's impossible. Carol always said Kendall chose to be independent and didn't want their help. Another lie. Another revision of history, to make their favoritism seem like appropriate parenting. The final piece of evidence came a week later, while Emma and I were helping Jessica move some wedding gifts to her new apartment. Jessica mentioned that Dylan's parents had surprised them with an early wedding gift. They bought us a house, she said, still sounding amazed by her good fortune. A 3-bedroom house in Maple Heights. Dylan didn't even know they were looking for one. Emma and I exchanged glances. Maple Heights was one of the nicer neighborhoods in town. Houses there started at around $200,000. That's incredibly generous, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. The down payment alone was $50,000, Jessica continued. Dylan's parents said they wanted to make sure we started our marriage with a strong financial foundation. That night, Emma helped me dig through public records to find the property transfer documents. The house had indeed been purchased with a $50,000 down payment, and the money had come from an account that was specifically labeled in the bank records as Kendall's college account. My parents had taken money that was originally intended for my education and used it to buy Dylan a house. They'd literally stolen my college fund to purchase my brother's wedding gift. I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by student loan statements and evidence of years of financial manipulation, and finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't just favoritism or poor financial planning. This was systematic, deliberate, and sustained financial abuse disguised as appropriate parenting. And in 2 weeks, I was going to Dylan's wedding, where I was expected to smile and pretend that everything was normal, while my parents celebrated their successful manipulation with a $75,000 party funded by money that should have helped both their children succeed. I spent the 2 weeks before Dylan's wedding gathering evidence like I was preparing for the most important court case of my life. Emma helped me organize 8 years' worth of bank statements, investment records, property documents, and loan applications into a comprehensive timeline that told the complete story of my parents' financial deception. My first stop was Attorney Bradford's office, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and family law. Emma had found him through her graduate program connections, and he agreed to review my documentation. This is one of the most systematic cases of family financial manipulation I've ever seen, he said, after spending 2 hours reviewing my evidence. What your parents did goes beyond favoritism. They've committed several forms of fraud, including forging documents and misrepresenting inheritance funds. Attorney Bradford explained that using money from an account labeled Kendall's college account to purchase Dylan's house could be considered theft, especially since the original funds came from an inheritance that should have benefited both children equally. There's also the issue of the life insurance policy, he continued. Taking out a significant policy on an adult child without their knowledge while simultaneously refusing to invest in their education could be seen as evidence of financial manipulation designed to benefit from that person's death. But the most shocking discovery came when Attorney Bradford's investigation revealed that my parents had been forging my signature on financial documents. They'd taken out loans against my current salary and credit score using my earning potential as an engineer to secure funding for Dylan's lifestyle. Atisa, you're legally responsible for approximately $43,000 in debt that you never agreed to incur, he explained. Your parents have been using your creditworthiness as collateral for their other son's expenses. I stared at the loan documents he showed me. My signature had been forged on 3 separate applications, and the debt was accumulating interest in my name. My parents hadn't just refused to help me with college. They'd actively damaged my financial future to support Dylan. Detective Sullivan from the Financial Crimes Unit agreed to investigate the forged documents, but she warned me that family financial fraud cases were difficult to prosecute. The emotional component makes these cases complex, she explained. Parents often justify their actions by claiming they were acting in the family's best interest, but she confirmed that what my parents had done met the legal definition of fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. The evidence was overwhelming, and there would likely be consequences once I decided to pursue legal action. The wedding planner, Monica, accidentally provided the final piece of information I needed. During a conversation about last-minute arrangements, she mentioned the total cost of Dylan's wedding. Your parents have really spared no expense, she said admiringly. The final total is just over $100,000. That's more than most people spend on their first house. $100,000. My parents were spending 8 times the amount they'd claimed they couldn't afford for my college education on a single day of celebration for Dylan. They mentioned that the money came from a special family fund, Monica continued. Something about a long-term savings plan for important family events. I knew exactly what special family fund she was referring to. It was the same inheritance money they'd hidden from me 8 years ago, the same account they'd used to fund Dylan's lifestyle, while I ate ramen noodles and worked night shifts. Emma helped me make the final decision about what to do with all this evidence. We'd spent countless hours discussing whether confronting my family publicly was the right approach, considering the collateral damage it might cause. Jessica deserves to know what kind of family she's marrying into, Emma said, as we sat in my apartment the night before the wedding. And Dylan needs to understand that his lifestyle has been built on lies and manipulation, but it's their wedding day. I said, still struggling with the ethics of my plan. Is it fair to destroy that for them? Is it fair that your parents are about to give Dylan another $50,000 as a wedding gift while you're paying off debt they secretly created in your name? Emma replied. She was right. Attorney Bradford had discovered that my parents planned to give Dylan an additional cash gift of $50,000, supposedly as a starting fund for his new business ventures. The money was coming from an account that was labeled Family Emergency Fund, but was really just another portion of the inheritance they'd hidden from me. More importantly, the forged loan documents meant that Dylan's lifestyle was being subsidized by debt that I would be legally responsible for paying. My credit score was already being damaged by loans I'd never agreed to, and my future financial security was being compromised to fund my brother's present comfort. I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting anyone. It was just enabling my parents to continue their manipulation while putting my own financial future at risk. Jessica was about to marry into a family that would expect her to accept their twisted dynamics. And Dylan was about to receive another massive financial gift that he didn't deserve and hadn't earned. The folder I prepared for the wedding contained everything. Bank statements showing the hidden inheritance loan documents with forged signatures, investment records, proving my parents' ability to help with college property records, showing they'd used my college fund to buy Dylan's house and insurance documents, proving they'd bet on my death while refusing to invest in my education. At the top of the folder was a simple timeline that showed every lie my parents had told, every dollar they'd given Dylan, and every opportunity they'd denied me. The evidence was organized, irrefutable, and devastating. Emma squeezed my hand as we arrived at the wedding venue. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked at the reception hall decorated with $15,000 floral arrangements and filled with guests who believed my parents' version of our family story. In a few hours, those same people would hear the truth about 8 years of financial manipulation, systematic favoritism, and deliberate deception. "I'm sure," I said, holding the folder that contained the evidence that would change everything. "It's time for everyone to know what really happened." The wedding ceremony was beautiful, and I genuinely felt happy for Jessica as she walked down the aisle in her stunning dress. She looked radiant, filled with hope and excitement about starting her new life with Dylan. For a moment, I questioned whether I should go through with my plan, watching her face glow with joy and anticipation. Dylan actually looked more mature than I'd ever seen him standing at the altar in his perfectly fitted tuxedo. Maybe marriage would change him, I thought. Maybe this was the beginning of him becoming a responsible adult who would appreciate what he had. But then I remembered the $43,000 in debt that my parents had secretly created in my name, the $50,000 they planned to give Dylan today, and the 8 years of lies they'd told everyone about why they couldn't help with my education. The reception proceeded normally for the first 2 hours. Dinner was served on expensive china, the band played music that probably cost more per hour than I made in a week, and guests mingled in the elegantly decorated ballroom. My parents moved through the crowd, like proud hosts accepting congratulations on the beautiful wedding they'd provided for their son. When the speeches began, I sat at my assigned table with Emma, feeling the weight of the manila folder in my lap. Uncle Steve spoke first, telling funny stories about Dylan's childhood. Jessica's father gave a touching speech about gaining a son and welcoming Dylan into their family. Mom cried happy tears as she talked about watching her baby boy grow into a man ready for marriage. Then the microphone was opened for anyone who wanted to share thoughts about the happy couple. A few college friends spoke. Jessica's sister told a heartwarming story, and Dylan's roommate from Millbrook made everyone laugh with embarrassing anecdotes. I stood up, and Emma squeezed my hand one last time. "I'd like to say something about Dylan and our family," I announced, walking toward the microphone with my folder. "Dylan has always been incredibly fortunate." I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Our parents have supported him in ways that most young people can only dream about. They've provided him with financial security, educational opportunities, and a lifestyle that many families simply cannot afford." Guests nodded approvingly. Parents smiled, thinking I was building toward a traditional speech about family values and brotherhood. "What some of you might not know," I continued, opening my folder, "is exactly how our parents managed to provide such generous support for Dylan, while simultaneously claiming they couldn't afford to help with my college education." The room went quiet. I could see confusion on faces throughout the audience. 8 years ago, when I was accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I needed $12,000 to cover the remaining costs. My parents told me they simply could not afford to help me. They showed me bills and expenses, explained their budget constraints, and suggested I attend community college instead. Dylan was staring at me from the head table, his face pale. "What I discovered recently," I said, holding up bank statements, "is that during the exact same time period, my parents were giving Dylan a monthly allowance of $2,000, plus paying for his car insurance, gas, entertainment, and clothing. Over 3 years, this support totaled over $60,000. Gasps rippled through the audience. Jessica's parents looked confused and concerned. But that's not all. I continued, my voice growing stronger. The same year they told me they had no savings to help with my education, they had inherited $300,000 from my grandmother. They invested this money and used portions of it to fund Dylan's college education, which cost $45,000 per year. I held up the inheritance documents so everyone could see them. While I worked night shifts at a warehouse to pay for community college, eating ramen noodles and living in a 400-square-foot apartment, Dylan was attending an expensive private college, driving a brand new car, and taking spring break trips to Cancun. All funded by inheritance money that should have been used to help both of their children. Mom stood up at the head table. "Kendall, this is neither the time nor the place, Wombani Commercer." "Actually, Mom," I interrupted, "this is exactly the time and place. Because today you're spending over $100,000 on this wedding, while simultaneously giving Dylan a $50,000 cash gift as a wedding present. And all of this money is coming from accounts that were originally intended to help both of your children succeed." I held up the property records. The down payment for Dylan and Jessica's house came from an account specifically labeled Kendall's college account. You literally used money that was designated for my education to buy my brother a house. Jessica was staring at Dylan in shock. She clearly had no idea about any of this. Shatitam. "But the most disturbing part," I said, pulling out the final set of documents, "is what I discovered about the loans you've taken out in my name. Without my knowledge or consent, you've forged my signature on loan applications, totaling $43,000, using my credit and earning potential as collateral to fund Dylan's lifestyle." Detective Sullivan stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the back of the room. She'd agreed to attend as my witness and to serve papers if necessary. "For 8 years, I continued, you've told everyone that I chose to be independent, that I turned down your offers of help because I wanted to earn my degree myself. You've created an elaborate story about my character and Dylan's needs to justify systematic financial favoritism that goes beyond simple preference. What you've done meets the legal definition of fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse." Dad tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. "You took out a $200,000 life insurance policy on me the same week you refused to help with college costs. You've spent more on this wedding than I'll earn in 2 years as an engineer. You've given Dylan over $300,000 in direct support, while actively damaging my credit and financial future." The room was completely silent. Jessica was crying, but they weren't happy tears anymore. "And Dylan," I said, looking directly at my brother, "I need you to understand that your entire adult life has been funded by money that was stolen from me and by debt that was illegally created in my name. Every comfort you've enjoyed, every opportunity you've been given has come at my expense." Dylan finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know about the loans, but you knew about everything else," I replied. "You knew about the monthly allowances, the inheritance money, the college funding, the house down payment. You knew our parents could afford to help me, and you watched them refuse while continuing to take their money yourself." Detective Sullivan approached the head table and served my parents with papers for the fraud investigation. The legal process was officially beginning. Jessica stood up her beautiful wedding dress, making the moment even more heartbreaking. "I can't do this," she said quietly. "I can't start a marriage built on lies and manipulation." She walked out of the reception hall, leaving Dylan sitting alone at the head table. Several guests followed her, including her parents, who looked devastated by what they'd learned about their daughter's new husband's family. The wedding was over. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded exactly as Attorney Bradford had predicted. My parents were forced to transfer the remaining inheritance funds to an account in my name totaling over $150,000. The forged loans were investigated and removed from my credit report, and my parents became legally responsible for the debt they'd created. Dylan had to return the house since the down payment was ruled to be stolen funds. He also had to get his first real job in 8 years, working as a sales associate at a retail store, while trying to figure out how to function without constant financial support. Jessica did annul the marriage after learning the full extent of Dylan's entitled lifestyle and our family's manipulation. She deserved better than to be dragged into a relationship built on deception and financial fraud. My parents eventually agreed to attend family counseling, where they were forced to confront their systematic favoritism and its impact on both their children. The process was painful, but it was the first time they'd ever acknowledged that their treatment of Dylan and me had been unfair and harmful. Today, 2 years later, I'm completely debt-free for the first time in my adult life. The inheritance money paid off my student loans, and the removal of the fraudulent debt restored my credit score. I was able to buy a house with Emma, who's now my fiancée, and we're planning a wedding that will cost about $3,000 and be filled with people who actually love and support both of us. Dylan is still learning how to live without constant financial support, but he's actually become a better person through the process. Working a regular job has given him perspective on what money means and how hard most people work to earn it. We have a relationship now, not a close one, but we can have conversations without the resentment that poisoned our family dynamics for so long. My parents and I maintain limited contact. They've apologized multiple times, and they're working to understand how their favoritism damaged our family. But trust takes time to rebuild, and some choices have consequences that last longer than apologies can fix. The most important thing I learned through this experience is that standing up for yourself isn't selfish or mean. It's necessary for healing and growth. Families that truly love each other don't play favorites with money, don't create systematic inequality between siblings, and don't build one child's success on another child's exploitation. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family, or watched someone else deal with unequal treatment from their parents? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family manipulation and finding your own path to success. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve equal treatment and respect from their family members. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps someone else find the courage to stand up for themselves when family dynamics become toxic and harmful. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, and you deserve relationships built on honesty, equality, and genuine love.